BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday, and we are going back to June 4th of 1963 to talk about the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. This is a topic that was requested by numerous people over the last 6 months, and I appreciate all of your suggestions, and now today is the day. And I'm really glad that everyone was encouraging me to do an episode on this, because with the murders of Linda Edwards and Robert Domingos, we can see very clearly that there are undeniable similarities in the behavior of their perpetrator, the perpetrator who committed that crime, their murderer, and the Zodiac Killer. I mean, the way that the crime was planned, the way that it was organized. And it's not only the Zodiac Killer, but even more precisely, the Zodiac Killer at Lake Berryessa, where Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards were teenagers, and they were murdered in a seaside area somewhere near Santa Barbara and Gaviota State Park. And I have to give a big thank you to Dr. John B. Everett, who made the series The Zodiac Killer's First Victims. It's like a documentary. It's divided up into 5 parts that you can watch here on YouTube. You can also go over to the Zodiac Killer channel, where they have some great things on Was Sandy the Zodiac Killer? Some very good resources are available online. And I'm going to give the disclaimer for this one. I am not an expert on the Domingos-Edwards case. I want to do something in this episode and to share it as a new set of eyes, a fresh take on the subject, maybe someone who is somewhat of a newcomer to this specific incident will see something that other people will get curious about, and somebody else might connect the dots, but I just wanted to be very clear about that. But yes, this crime occurred on June 4th of 1963. Robert Domingos was 18 and Linda Edwards was 17. It was a senior skip day, and they were on a beach, more or less. They drove in Robert's Pontiac to this seaside area, and it has greatly morphed in the area. It morphed over the years because from John Everett's presentation, you will see everything you will want to know about Gaviota. Gaviota is the name of the state park that's nearby, but you'll see everything you could imagine about the seaside area in which where this crime took place. And what he states is that the beach is now filled with just rocks, and it looks horribly uncomfortable and unpleasant for anyone who would want to spend time there. But in all reality, in the 1960s, it was a much sandier beach, and it was a place where people would go for sunbathing and beach combing. So, I mean, that's just some good info to look out for. It's a place where people would go to spend some time in the sun or in the water, and you have 2 people, Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, boyfriend and girlfriend. And some other points that we should note is that this was a senior skip day, so this is going on actually in the early afternoon. And there are 3 major red flags already that were just absolutely jumping out at me when I was looking into some of this material. Like, to get into the specifics of the Domingos-Edwards case, and we'll go through them step by step. The first is that they were ambushed more or less by a perpetrator who came with a gun, he came with a knife, he came with pre-cut lengths of rope, and he came with a box of matches. So the first thing that absolutely stood out to me was a question rather than anything else. The first red flag was, what was the perpetrator wearing? Because we mentioned all the similarities to Lake Berryessa, or saying that there are similarities to Lake Berryessa, about how on September 27th of 1969, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were attacked by the waterfront in a vulnerable place, and the perpetrator is carrying a gun, a knife, pre-cut lengths of rope, and he was wearing the famous Zodiac killer hood. I wanted to know, was this perpetrator hooded, or was he wearing something to cover his face? Something that was similar and reminiscent of the Zodiac killer costume that was worn at Lake Berryessa. But as we said, Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards both passed away, so they didn't live to tell the tale, and we will not have anything other than what the forensics can tell, what the forensic scientists can do to reconstruct the situation. Now, some people even believe that, much like Lake Berryessa, this perpetrator is carrying a gun. He's instructing the female victim to tie up the male victim, and then he's going to tie up the female victim, and then perhaps he could stab them, perhaps he would shoot them. He isn't quite sure. And in this instance, I don't think it would matter too much for a very big reason that we'll say in a second. Then they're somehow able to get away for a bit. They make a dash, rather, and 26 bullets are fired. And I cite Michael Cole's book, Zodiac Revisited. It's in Volume 3 when he was sharing that 26 bullets were fired at Lake Berryessa. That's way more than any of the other Zodiac crimes, like the Paul Stein murder, where there was one bullet fired, or Lake Herman Road, or Blue Rock Springs. And what Michael Cole says about the Domingos-Edwards murders is, many people view the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in 1966 as a practice killing, more or less, or that this is a time when the Zodiac would have been really learning how to become a better serial killer, testing the waters and training wheels. And I know it sounds terrible when you're talking about murder that way, but someone is actually killing people for practice. But then when this individual committed his first murder, or murders, plural, then he realized that things are not always going to go according to plan, and it's actually going to be a much messier job. What if, the victims run away? What if people fight back? How exactly is it going to go down? So that's why there were 26 bullets that were fired at the Domingos-Edwards site near Gaviota. So they moved from the beach toward a creek bed, because I believe both of the bodies are actually both bodies actually fall in a creek bed when they are finally deceased. And then the perpetrator dragged them from this creek bed to a small shack that is nearby the seaside. And this there are a few descriptions of this shack which no longer exist. The first is that, okay, it's almost like a small cabin, but then in other descriptions they are referring to it as a place that is made out of driftwood. It's like a lean-to, but it definitely has a door on it, and on the door there is this piece of a tarpaulin, and then that will become significant because the perpetrator is going to try and set this on fire. And as in the past, I may have even stated on the channel that the shack was burned, but from going through John Everett's material as well as some other sources, it appears the perpetrator struck some matches, tried to set that tarp on fire, and just attempted to set the place ablaze. What would be the motivation for that? Perhaps to destroy evidence, but there could be a more symbolic reason for that, because before the shack is attempted to have been burned to the ground, attempted, I'm really going to reemphasize that, the perpetrator cut Linda Edwards' swimsuit. Now, Robert Domingos is wearing a pair of surfer shorts, and Linda Edwards is wearing a one-piece swimsuit. Someone took a knife and cut the swimsuit down, exposing Linda Edwards' breast area. So the swimsuit is cut with a knife and split open. Now, once again, why would somebody do that? There is also no evidence that Linda Edwards was sexually assaulted. But so the bodies have been dragged to the shack. Someone has tried to set it on fire, mostly unsuccessfully from what I gather, and then the swimsuit is cut open with a knife, and then the bodies are left there, more or less, and then the perpetrator has disappeared, and it remains an unsolved murder case. Before we really talk about the Zodiac killer anymore, I think it's very important to say rest in peace to Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. Sounds like a terrible tragedy that they lost their lives because of some type of opportunistic murderer, whether this is some type of serial killer who is trying to learn how to become a better serial killer to launch a reign of terror in California. I'm not sure, but when it comes to the victims, rest in peace to them all the same. But let's look at what could have happened. I said that there were three major red flags that stood out to me. The second one is this was a senior skip day, and this is happening in the early afternoon. I mean, so that tells me something that what kind of murderer, perpetrator, serial killer is going to be targeting a beach in the early afternoon on a weekday? I just got the gut feeling, first instinct, that this was someone who must have had a connection to the school, who knew it was a senior skip day, who had that type of information, because how or why else would the perpetrator be on that beach at that time expecting to find these two individuals? So, and bear in mind, they were the only other people on the beach. If they had more witnesses, more information would have been provided. And thus the perpetrator seemed to be quite certain that they would have been there. And I say that, as an assumption. I'm completely aware, just sharing some things about what I would believe happened. But if we also want to talk about the Zodiac killer, at this time, why don't we lay things out as what are the similarities between the murders of Domingos-Edwards and the other Zodiac killer crimes? The first thing is, carrying the gun, the knife, pre-cut lengths of rope, exactly like Lake Berryessa, right? But the other thing is the brand of the ammo that was used in the gun was Super X. This was a .22 caliber gun, most likely a pistol, but this may have been a rifle. There's also always that debate. Even at Lake Herman Road, when the Zodiac killer used a .22 caliber firearm, people are still not even 100% certain, but the brand of the ammo was Super X, and the Zodiac even wrote that in a letter, like saying that the brand of the ammo that was used at the Lake Herman Road shooting was Super X. Now, the next thing is, we mentioned that in the shack that Linda Edwards' swimsuit is cut with a knife, but she's not sexually assaulted. Someone tried to set fire to the place. The Zodiac killer mailed in the Halloween card that said, by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire. And that comes to us from the Tim Holt comics and the Wheel of Death. But is it possible that it is a little bit more than just a reference to a comic book or talking about how there are different ways to commit murders? Is it possible that that is also a reference to the Domingos-Edwards murders? Because in this case, all of those different elements were used: rope, knife, a gun, and fire. Even though it's a rather pitiful attempt if someone just tried to strike some matches and tried to set the place ablaze but was unsuccessful, then that is, but all of those elements are present. And why cut the swimsuit on Linda Edwards' dead body for no reason, if she wasn't sexually assaulted, when the perpetrator clearly had the upper hand, because he was able to subdue and he was able to incapacitate both Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, but yet she wasn't sexually assaulted? Was it simply just to be very clear that a knife had been used and to leave the signature by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire? That's another one. Also, you have the perpetrator targeting couples at a secluded spot, and you also have the bodies of water connection. Even if you go back to the murder of Ray Davis in 1962, where did that take place, right? Oceanside, California. And many of the incidents in Zodiac activity take place either near a body of water or a name that is associated with a body of water. Lake Herman Road, for example, you have the word lake. Blue Rock Springs, you have the word springs. Lake Berryessa, you have the word lake as well. And with Lake Herman Road, the parking lot in which David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were murdered in the parking lot is an entrance to a water pumping station. Once again, you have that connection to the body of water again. And here you have Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards shot on a beach, and then they move, as we said, up to that shack, which is a little bit more inland, if I can follow what John Everett shared in his presentation. But in regards to the Zodiac killer having anything to do with this crime, well, why not report it? Why wasn't this mentioned in a letter? Why wasn't this written on the corridor at Lake Berryessa when the Zodiac killer wrote all the dates of criminal activity? many people who go down this pathway, including Michael Cole, as we said in Zodiac Revisited, say that it's more about the mathematical clues, it's more about the criminal signatures, and this perpetrator did not want to give away all their material at once. The next point is that the Zodiac killer only wanted to attribute the murders of 1968 and 69 to that serial killer persona. And as we've already said, Gaviota with Domingos and Edwards, Sherry Jo Bates, maybe the murder of Nikki Benedict in 1967, the Swindle murders, the murder of Ray Davis, all of these could have been murders that were committed by the same person, but they were not reported in 1968. Like someone's not calling in and saying, this is the Zodiac speaking, I also murdered Ray Davis, I also murdered Robert Domingos, I also murdered Linda Edwards, because they were doing something that was a little bit more intricate, it was a little bit more detailed, and had a little bit more significance to the perpetrator. It had a little bit more significance to the murderer. And this isn't just me rambling off the top of my head. A lot of people have their own theories about how if you put the Zodiac symbol, like the circle with the cross going through it, the crosshairs, on top of Mount Diablo, then it's going to be divided into 4 quadrants, and that the Zodiac killer is going to be using either a different type of firearm or a different type of method to murder the victims in each of the 4 quadrants. I mean, people have some very big theories about the Zodiac killer, but with Domingos-Edwards, I mean, there are undeniable similarities. I mean, people were in a secluded area by a body of water, and it's possible that the perpetrator instructed Linda Edwards to tie up Robert Domingos the same way that Cecilia Shepard was instructed to tie up Brian Hartnell at Lake Berryessa, but they did recover the pre-cut lengths of rope. So you would have someone who did not succeed in everything as skillfully as the perpetrator did at Lake Berryessa. But if this is in 1963, and think about what I just said about someone who would have had a connection to the school, it's possible that the perpetrator was either someone who was a teenager as well. Bear in mind that Robert Domingos is 18, Linda Edwards is 17. Either someone who's a teenager as well, or someone who is very young, definitely on the younger side. And 1963 is 5 years before the first canonical Zodiac killer crime. Thereabouts, because of course that took place December 20th of 1968, and this was June 4th of 1963, so this is June versus December. But John Everett also just wants to share one more thing in his presentation about it's very normal for serial killers to operate in a way that is spaced out, that is like not similar, like that is not immediate. Like it's not murdering on one weekend and then they have to murder the next weekend and then they have to murder 2 days later. It's normal for a serial killer to commit a murder and then sometimes years later they will commit their next murder. And he provides the example of Ted Bundy operating like that, and I can think of a different Ted, Theodore Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, also had very large gaps in between his mailings of the bombs, like the Unabomber bombs, were definitely mailed with a great amount of space in between them. And I was even just looking at the timeline back when we did the Unabomber episodes here on this channel, and I was like, wow, I mean, there really is like a very odd sense of gaps in time with the Unabomber and when he mailed those things. But with the Zodiac Killer, it's very similar as well. You have like December of 1968 to July of 1969. Then the next crime is on September 27th of 1969. So I would want to make sure that it's not proof, absolutely not. But what's more what John Everett said with the Zodiac Killer, because we don't have the same fingerprints left at every crime scene, or the same pieces of DNA left at every crime scene, or even a pure signature. And as we said, Robert Dominguez drove that Pontiac to the beach. If the Zodiac had drawn a circle with a cross going through it at the crime scene or on the Pontiac car door, then that would be something. That would definitely be something that he the authorities could use to be like, yeah, okay, this is obviously the same person, they're using the same symbol, or that someone is doing something in a very similar way. I mean, that would be evidence, but that type of material is not there. So what do people do? They look at the behaviors and the actions of the murderer in each of these incidents, whether it's the murder of Ray Davis, Domingos-Edwards, the Swindle murders, Lake Herman Road, all the way to the murder of Paul Stein on October 11th of 1969. And they want to find out where are the similarities in these incidents. Now, thank you for listening to this segment here. We'll be right back after this message, and then we will examine the more skeptical challenges to whether or not the Zodiac Killer had any involvement in the Domingos-Edwards murders. Okay, so please stay tuned. Bum ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum bum bum. At this time, I would like to talk about some of the ways in which you can help Black Box Online Radio. This channel relies on your support, and the best way you can help out is just by listening to some more content. If you like what you hear, you can hit that like button, subscribe, and share with your friends on social media. But I should also say that Black Box Online Radio now has a Teespring page, and there will be some links in the description box. Please feel free to check out some of the merchandise that is available. Almost all sizes and colors are listed. So, you can also help out by going over to the Zodiac Killer channel and watching the documentary series Obsession into Darkness, parts 1, 2, and 3. I was one of the contributors for that, and you can see some other great Zodiac content on the Zodiac Killer channel. And yes, there will be a part 4 of Obsession into Darkness at some point in the future. And for now, let's get back to the show. Okay, hello everybody, welcome back. Now, in this segment, I said we were going to go through some of the skeptical challenges to whether or not the Zodiac Killer had any involvement in the Domingos-Edwards murders. And at the beginning, I said there were 3 major red flags that stood out to me. One was a question, what was the perpetrator wearing? The second was that this took place at such an early time during a weekday. Did somebody have familiarity with the school? I know that's almost like a question, but I could phrase it in a more declarative way and say that the perpetrator likely had some familiarity with the school where Linda Edwards and Robert Domingos went. And the third one is that Linda Edwards' swimsuit was cut with a knife, and her breasts were exposed, but she was not sexually assaulted. Does that even suggest that the perpetrator was contemplating sexually assaulting her, contemplating raping her, but then backed out at the last second? And when we say contemplated, yes, the idea came to mind, the urge or the maybe even a small attempt, but then the perpetrator realized that he was unable to do so, and that he just decided not to. Was that an attempted sexual assault by cutting open her swimsuit and exposing her body? I'm not sure, but that is the third one that stood out to me. In regards to skeptical challenges to this theory, to people who think that this is the first crime of the Zodiac Killer, or maybe the second crime, or one of the early sets of murders that was committed by the Zodiac, the first thing that stands out to me is that time of day. When did the Zodiac Killer operate this early in the day? Because we even mentioned the line about how there's the Zodiac Killer said that he was going to attack the school bus and get the kiddies as they come bouncing off the bus, and the authorities took that seriously because they had to, but they were like, there's a very low probability that this individual is going to act on this, because the Zodiac operated on nights, evenings, and weekends. I mean, Lake Berryessa even, that occurred in the evening at 6:30 p.m., and the people who think that Nikki Benedict was a murder of the Zodiac Killer, like that Nikki Benedict was a Zodiac Killer victim, she was the girl that was murdered in Poway, California on the 1st of May, 1967, and she was also stabbed by a knife. That occurred at 6:30 p.m. All of these crimes are occurring in the evening or at nighttime after dark. With the Domingos-Edwards case, that is definitely not what's going on. That is happening earlier in the daytime. Is the time of day significant? I'm not necessarily sure, but as we said, looking at the behaviors and actions of this individual, I mean, is this person so opportunistic that they're just going to sneak away whatever chance they get because their ambition is only murder? Maybe. I mean, that could be true. But what I would say as an alternative is, that's just a difference. It's just something different, that the crime occurred in the early afternoon as opposed to the evening or at night. I think that is just something that we should note. Here is a bigger skeptical challenge, or just a bigger difference with any of the Zodiac murders, and that is that the bodies were moved into that shack. when did the Zodiac Killer ever do that? I can't think of a single example. In fact, even when we did the episodes on the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings, I was like, a big difference between those and the murders that were committed by the Zodiac Killer is that the murderer in the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings moved the bodies to dump sites that were perhaps even 100 yards away from the road, carrying a lifeless body. And in the case of Domingos-Edwards, they were most likely dragged to that shack where the individual tried to strike some matches and set a tarp on fire that was on the shack door. But once again, the Zodiac Killer did not move the bodies, not at Lake Herman Road, to the best of our knowledge, not at Blue Rock Springs, and even at Lake Berryessa when they're tied up, the bodies were not moved to any location. The two individuals even survived the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and Cecilia Shepard would pass away 2 days later in the hospital. And then at the Paul Stein murder, the body was moved. I mean, the person who shot Paul Stein in that taxi cab definitely moved his body in some ways, but not like picking him up and carrying him to a different area. Absolutely not. And definitely not dragging the body outside of the taxi to a different dump site. Absolutely not. That is another thing that the Zodiac Killer did not do. And with the canonical Zodiac crimes, the Zodiac did not try to set anything on fire. Yes, the Zodiac wrote by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire in numerous things, most notably the Halloween card, but also in just there's a connection to that. People think it's going to come up in some other pieces of literature, and even it says by knife on the car door at Lake Berryessa. So I mean it seems that that Tim Holt comic was very influential on the Zodiac Killer. So the next point is about how this is not that this was not the Zodiac Killer, is just that fire was not used. The car was set on fire at the Kathleen Johns incident on Highway Route 132, March 22nd of 1970, but that is an unconfirmed Zodiac incident. And with the murders of Domingos-Edwards in 1963, another difference, is that Linda Edwards' swimsuit was cut. The Zodiac Killer did not do that to any of the female victims, not Darlene Ferrin, not Betty Lou Jensen, not Cecilia Shepard, and Cecilia Shepard was hog-tied. Her feet were tied up to her hands. She was stabbed 5 times in the front and 5 times in the back. The perpetrator had numerous opportunities to cut open her shirt or to remove her shirt because she was wearing a blouse at the time. Darlene Ferrin was murdered in a slack dress, and she was dead on arrival at the hospital when they pronounced her dead at 12:38 a.m. on the I guess that's the 5th of July 1969. The perpetrator could have removed her from the car and also done that, just made a very quick cut across her shirt, or her slack dress, and exposed her breast, but that is something that just did not happen at any of the other Zodiac Killer incidents. And which one would you actually, what do you think is a better interpretation of that evidence? Do you believe that yes, indeed, this was the Zodiac Killer and that Linda Edwards' swimsuit was cut open and she was exposed to show that a knife was used? Or do you think that this was not the Zodiac Killer, and all of these differences that we've already said thus far are significant of this just being a different perpetrator? In terms of a skeptical alternative, we don't even have to talk about the Zodiac canonical crimes to look at another major point. There are opportunistic murderers out there. There are individuals who maybe they've been released from prison recently, maybe they've been released from mental institutions recently, and there are people who will target victims that are not pre-planned. The crime is chosen, like the crime has been decided, and it's a premeditated murder, but the victim doesn't have to be pre-selected, and this happens all the time. Like, if you just go through the true crime world. I was even having a conversation with a guy once about how people operate like this. And we were going back and forth about the murder of Zhang Yingying, actually, and like he's saying like the murderer did it in a premeditated way, and I was like, but he had never met the victim before. He's like, okay, he wanted to commit a murderous crime, but the victim was not pre-selected. People can do things like that. Now, I know I'm supposed to be doing skeptical alternatives right now, but in regards to the victims being pre-selected, we do not have 100% certainty of the significance of this crime, but I mean, it seems like somebody would have had prior knowledge that they would have been on the beach in that specific spot at that time. And that doesn't have to mean that they were targeted in somewhat of a hit job, or that they even knew the perpetrator. This could just be someone who learned that these two individuals were going to be in a vulnerable place. It was a senior skip day. They knew that somebody was probably going to be at that beach. But something really bothers me about that, and this isn't even a skeptical challenge or skeptical alternative. Instead, this is just saying that somebody must have had some knowledge that it would be those two on the beach, and only those two. Like, if it was a crowded beach, even with 10 people, I don't think this murder would have happened, because the perpetrator was definitely inexperienced, firing 26 shots, and then having to drag the bodies back to a different location. I don't know about that. I mean, those are definitely things that the Zodiac killer did not do, but, in regards to premeditation, absolutely. It does appear that the Domingos-Edwards murders were premeditated. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a some type of spur of the moment decision. Like when we did the episode on Kenneth Harrison, the serial killer known as the Giggler, he said that he would be just, walking down the street more or less, and he would just be overtaken by a murderous impulse, and he would do things like throwing a woman off a bridge, or bludgeoning a man to death with a rock, for example. But I don't see how that could have possibly happened at that Gaviota with the Domingos-Edwards murders. This had to have been a planned, premeditated crime. How important was it who this person was murdering? I'm not 100% sure. It may not have been important at all. But if we look at that, bringing a gun, bringing a knife, bringing pre-cut lengths of rope, and I mean, the box of matches, maybe that's significant, maybe it's not. However, that definitely means that this person went there to murder somebody. The pre-cut lengths of rope, I think, is really what gives it away. I mean, someone can have a gun on them, someone can have a knife on them, but it really appears that these two individuals were targeted by an opportunistic murderer who wanted to act on some type of murderous impulse. And it may be something quite to the contrary about how the significance of the victim may have had no relevance at all. In fact, as something as something in a different direction, they may have just simply been two people whom this individual wanted to kill because he was mad that he was a rejected lover who wanted to be with a woman but he couldn't. Or some people think that the Zodiac killer was a homosexual and that he targeted couples like at Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, and at Lake Berryessa because he was ashamed of his homosexuality and that it was getting revenge on heterosexual couples for being different. And I think that you can get the idea there. Is there something like that happened at Gaviota? I really am not sure. I'm not even convinced that the Zodiac killer was gay. This is more coming from an interview that Paul Avery did with a forensic psychiatrist who made that proclamation. But there are many people out there who believe that the Zodiac killer was a homosexual, and that's why couples were targeted together. Someone who is very bitter that he is not like one of them, quote unquote normal, ashamed of his differences, and so on. But if you look at some of the suspects, person by person, if you think that Donald Lee Booyock was the Zodiac killer, then he's not your guy, because all of the crimes prior to 1968 couldn't have been Donald Lee Booyock, because he would have been in jail in Montana for the murder of Otto Fawson, serving 11 years of a life sentence. And with suspect by suspect plans, I think that this is one that is going to be much more difficult to if we're going to go through the suspect list, I would like to cite unsolvedcasebook.com for providing an excellent suspect list for this. And if you haven't read their website yet, I recommend it, unsolvedcasebook.com. And their piece on the Domingos-Edwards case starts out by saying, "The first suspect. Police quickly came up with a possible suspect. The initial focus was placed on a 17-year-old classmate of the two victims, who by all accounts had no problem stating that he was envious of Robert Domingos. Okay, if this is true that this guy was indeed the murderer, that would confirm my initial suspicion that the perpetrator was much closer to their age than any of the other possible suspects, as well as having some type of first-hand knowledge about the senior skip day, about their location, about their whereabouts. And let's keep going here. The unnamed teen was well known to the police. The youth had been arrested several times, including an arrest shortly after the murders, when he was causing trouble while intoxicated. He also had access to firearms owned by his father. When brought in for questioning, detectives noticed bruising on the young man's hand, which they believe could have occurred during the struggle with Robert Domingos. Alas, no evidence was forthcoming, and the teenager was released without charge. Now, when I was on ZodiacCiphers.com and I was reading the article that had been written about the Domingos-Edwards case there, it was written that it's possible that the perpetrator punched Robert Domingos in the face because of bruising that was discovered during the autopsy, or that punches were definitely thrown, so that could be another thing that was consistent, but I'm sure any defense attorney would dismiss that very easily. Well, is there another possibility about how somebody got a bruise on their hand? Was there something else that he may have punched? I mean, and I'm not really looking at this as a lawyer. I am not a lawyer, and they are often spinning circles and just trying to talk their clients out of situations. But instead, what actually happened? I mean, all of these things here definitely confirm a lot of my initial suspicions about this. Now, perhaps people would like to hear more about an individual named Sandy, and I wish I could tell you more about the guy, except we don't really know who he is. But that's the video that the Zodiac Killer channel did very well on the Domingos-Edwards case, but just asking the question, was Sandy the Zodiac Killer? Who is this suspect, Sandy? Well, let's read from Unsolved Casebook. Detectives on the investigation soon found themselves with a new set of prime suspects. A recent crime spree in the area which ended with the murder of a 63-year-old man, and I believe his name was Vernon Smith, although it's not written in this article here. And this saw the arrest of James Coleman and 17-year-old J.C. Reed Jr. James Coleman was actually 16 years old at the time, and they were charged with the murder. Their victim was named Vernon Smith. Yeah, there it's written down here. He had been stabbed to death during a robbery on June 2nd, 2 days prior to the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. During interviews, the suspects, Coleman and Reed Jr., admitted to taking part in a number of car thefts, robberies, and assaults during a crime spree that lasted several days. However, both denied being the murderer of Vern Smith. Instead, they placed blame on a third man whom they claimed they only knew as Sandy. The pair claimed that the robbery of Vernon Smith the pair claimed that during the robbery of Vernon Smith, their accomplice had stabbed the victim in the back without warning. The pair told the officers that that Sandy saw the murder as a joke and was even laughing at his own despicable act. Well, in terms of being the Zodiac Killer, I don't think that is. I think that could go either way. There was like someone sent me an article once about how the Zodiac Killer was even starting to be referred to as the Laughing Killer, and then he created the name Zodiac as a rebuttal to that because he thought that was pretty lame. But that definitely does not seem to be reported in other witness descriptions that the perpetrator was laughing while he murdered anyone. Following their exit from the crime scene, Coleman and Reed Jr. gave Sandy $20, then split the remaining takings from the crime spree between themselves. Before separating from Sandy, they stated that to make them feel uneasy, he started to make them feel uneasy, and he began talking of obtaining a .22 rifle. They last saw him at a motel in Arroyo Grande. And we've mentioned Arroyo Grande before on this channel. If you go back and find some of our episodes on the murder of Elise Paler, just recognizing a similar name, but I digress from that. A number of staff at the motel seemingly gave credence to the tale when he described seeing the man fitting the description of Sandy given by the suspects. Detectives soon cleared Coleman and Reed Jr. of any involvement in the Domingos-Edwards murders. The man known as Sandy, however, was now a major person of interest. And the long story short is, to this day, we do not know who this quote-unquote Sandy is, or if that's even his real name, but he is said to have a stocky build, sandy blonde hair, hence his nickname, and is around 5 feet 11 inches tall. So, 5'11", stocky build. Some people would instantly be like, "Oh my gosh, that's the Zodiac Killer," but of course you would need a little bit more info than just that. But definitely something worth looking into. And the next suspect they have here is Robert Lee Bell. As the search for the elusive Sandy was ongoing, another teenager came to the attention of the authorities. 17-year-old Robert Lee Bell was arrested in Sacramento after a tip-off from the Santa Barbara officials in regard to the theft of a .22 rifle that belonged to the teen's uncle. So apparently everybody is going after .22 caliber rifles on these particular days in the area. Robert Lee Bell was arrested on June 9th when he was found to be in possession of such a weapon. Whilst under arrest, officers noted the injuries to the boy's hands, and apparently everybody is punching a wall in this town. The wounds seem to have been about a week old, fitting the time of the murders. Santa Barbara officials also stated that Bell had left Lompoc and suddenly the Domingos-Edwards double murder had taken place. Bell, however, disputed this and claimed that he had quit his job at a car wash in Lompoc on May 31st and left for his family home in Sacramento on June 2nd. He also stated that he got the scratch wounds on his hands from a puppy, not a scuffle or a fight. Well, I mean, I suppose it's possible that the guy could be telling the truth, but it's also just like, that's your, alibi or your reason or your defense. No, I couldn't have committed the murders. I was playing with my puppy at the time, and my puppy bit me on my hand, and except it doesn't look like a bite, it looks more like a bruise. I mean, it's possible. It's possible. It just sounds kind of silly when you read it off like that. Ballistics from the rifle were tested, and it was soon discovered that bullets weren't a match to those that were used in the murder or belonging to the stolen rifle from Bell's uncle. Bell admitted that he had stolen the rifle from a different ranch. And those are some harder pieces of evidence that they can actually use, looking at the forensics, looking at the ballistics, and saying this was not the firearm that killed Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. So I think that is something that is a strong claim. Robert Lee Bell's claim of being back in Sacramento at the time of the murders was soon shown to be true. Several witnesses came forward to state that Bell had attended a baseball game in Sacramento, and this eliminated him as a suspect in the murders. Maybe he actually did bruise his hand playing with a puppy. But and the next suspect they have on their list is George Edward Gill. Justice Coleman and Reed Jr., those are the two guys that are associated with the murder of Vernon Smith. Justice Coleman and Reed Jr. were being prosecuted. Another suspect entered the fray. A 51-year-old vagrant named George Edward Gill suddenly became a leading person of interest after witnesses came forward in October. Gill, an Army veteran, had been living in the shack on Gaviota Beach prior to the murders. It was also reported that he had been seen firing a rifle around the time. As far as firing the rifle, trying to put that in connection to the shack, I think the Western Super XM ammo was found in the shack in boxes, that there were 4 boxes of the .22 caliber ammunition that were found inside the shack, and as we said, the perpetrator tried to burn it to the ground but was unsuccessful. So in that regard, well, I think let's just leave it at that for now, and let's go back to the article. It would take law enforcement over a year to trace the man that they wanted, but on December 2nd of 1964, George Edward Gill was arrested and questioned about the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. Gill openly admitted to living in the shack where the young couple's bodies were discovered, even admitting to being the person who built it. However, Gill was adamant that he had nothing to do with the murder, stating that he had left the area by that time. Well, what do you think of that? I mean, does that make you suspicious? This is going in the absolute opposite direction of any of my initial suspicions about the case, that it's someone closer to their age that was familiar with the senior skip day. But in this instance, you wouldn't need to have someone who was familiar with their plans or that knew that they were going to be on the beach at the time. If the guy is simply just at the shack waiting for somebody to come by and or for some reason something set him off that day, if he's already in the vicinity and he just notices 2 people on the beach sunbathing, he would have had a larger opportunity. So, I mean, like, we're being very clear. This is an unsolved case. We're just looking at the different possibilities. In both of these instances, I think that would work. An inconclusive polygraph test gave detectives hope that George Edward Gill may be the killer that they had been hunting. Alas, Gill wasn't their man. After 2 days in police custody, Gill was released without charge after his alibi of having left the San Jose area was proven. The case soon grew cold, until 1970 when Detective Bill Baker re-examined the case and began to see a link with one of the most infamous serial killers of all time, the Zodiac Killer. And the final suspect on their list is just the Zodiac Killer, but I don't think that individual needs any introduction. In regards to Sandy being the Zodiac Killer, if everything that they're saying about Sandy is true, that Sandy committed the murder of Vernon Smith, and then Sandy committed the murders of Domingos and Edwards, and then Sandy goes on to being the Zodiac killer, not only is the Zodiac killer the most inconsistent serial killer of all time, this Sandy-style Zodiac killer would be the most inconsistent serial killer of all time. Someone who just acts on a whim and stabs Vernon Smith in the back. I mean, alleged. Sandy, of course, has never been convicted of that. We don't even know if those two guys, um, Coleman and Reed, are telling the truth. But instead, it's like, that's a big difference that we said about the Domingos-Edwards case. And the one thing that wouldn't even fit into some guy just sitting in a shack is that he is just going to just go approach two people on the beach with the pre-cut lengths of rope. That definitely seems to me to be someone who was more or less perhaps stalking the two, or some type of person who was much more set on murdering them. And with the murder of Vernon Smith that you heard about, which perhaps we can do a larger episode on in the future, on that crime specifically, in that instance, you can see that someone is being very impulsive, definitely not being very calculating if it's a spur-of-the-moment decision. And also, you just have this petty thug who took a robbery too far, a botched robbery, whereas the murder of Domingos and Edwards, in that instance, it's not a botched robbery. It's definitely a premeditated, somewhat calculated murder, and we aren't necessarily sure of the motivation, but it's definitely not impulsive. I mean, this person, whoever killed Domingos and Edwards, had put a lot of thought into it, and that's definitely more significant of the Zodiac killer. If there's any instance where the Zodiac killer may have acted overly impulsively, it could have been the Paul Stein murder, but I don't even think that was an impulsive crime. I think that was much more calculated, based on everything that we know now, such as the radians, and the angles are matching up in terms of the distance in between the other crime scenes, as well as the clues in literature. It seems like that was also a calculated crime. But I just wanted to share that article that had been written on this case. Once again, unsolvedcasebook.com, Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, the Gaviota Beach. You can find that when they're online if you'd like to read through it for yourselves. They have some additional things about the Zodiac killer there. But thank you to anyone who has listened to this. And all right, thank you to everybody who has listened to this episode on the Domingos-Edwards case. And at this time, I would turn it over to you and just ask, what do you think about this? Do you think this was genuine Zodiac killer activity? Or do you believe that this crime, this double murder, was simply just a different opportunistic murderer? Or perhaps it was someone who was in the vicinity, if it's not this guy, George Edward Gill, who claims that he built the shack. Who did it? Maybe someone else was living in the shack and had access to that .22 caliber ammunition. Do you think it was just someone who saw two people and snapped? Or do you believe that this was a cold, methodical, and calculating, premeditated murder? Maybe one in which at least one of the victims was pre-chosen. And what do you think about this claim that we've been discussing throughout the duration of this episode, that the perpetrator had familiarity with their schedule, meaning that it's perhaps someone who may have even been a classmate or someone who may have worked at the school where Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards did? I really wanted to, I hope that was clear, that it doesn't have to be a high school student. It could just be someone who was working at the school in some capacity that could have committed these murders, or that person would have still had familiarity with their routines and their whereabouts and knew that they were planning to go to the beach on that day. But what do you think about anything to do with the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards? And one more time, I think we need to honor the victims, say rest in peace to them, because they lost their lives in a completely unnecessary and unprovoked way, and it's a horrible tragedy, and one day I hope there will be justice that will be brought to them. Please drop your ideas in the comments section below, and once again, this was a topic that was requested by one of the listeners. Many listeners, actually, over the last 6 months have been requesting this one. If there's anything you would like covered on this channel, please put your ideas in the comments section, or you can write the channel at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram, and yeah, that's where you can find the bonus podcast. So, see you on Instagram for that bonus podcast. Until next time.